You know, you've heard me often enough saying, well, I get so disappointed by this supposedly liberal government in Canberra, and I've attacked it a bit lately. What's it for? I mean, here it is, racking up $1 trillion debt, falling for the global warming craziness. But this week, to remind me, steady there, here comes Labor proving it could be worse. Here comes Labor's Treasury spokesman, for instance, Jim Chalmers, not to mention Labor's Foreign Affairs spokesman, Penny Wong. And oh yes, it could be a lot worse. Look, I know it's a miserable argument for a Liberal government that Labor would be even worse, but don't knock it. Think of the Americans who voted against Donald Trump, thinking, oh, well, President Joe Biden couldn't be any worse. How wrong they were, and how much they're now paying. At home, big jump in inflation, a rise in the unemployed, race policies and green politics going nuts. And abroad, Iran now cutting loose, not scared of anyone like Trump anymore. Israel in flames, thanks to rockets fired by the Palestinians, who Biden has just been paying for peace. The fool. But back to Australia. It could be worse here too. Look at Jim Chalmers. Gave a big speech yesterday about what he thought about this month's budget from the Morrison government. Trouble is, he did not say what's really wrong with it. He did not say, well, this budget spends too much, has no thought of repaying the nearly $1 trillion debt it will leave us. He did not say this debt, by the way, is looking a lot more dangerous very quickly, because I know, yes, sure, we've been told, don't worry, inflation won't be rising for years, which means interest rates will stay very, very low and we won't have to pay that much in interest payments. But you now look at this week in the United States. Oops, inflation just shot up there to over 4%. And right now here in Australia, a lot of employers are saying, we can't get workers. All those cheap backpackers are gone for one. And there's the start of wage pressure right there in some sectors. More, I suspect, than thought. Now, if that takes off, if inflation does jump, it is going to hurt. But Chalmers didn't say any of this. None of it. And that is so disappointing from Labor, because it takes the heat right off the Morrison government to tighten up. But worse is hinting, suggesting very clearly Labor would spend even more. Chalmers attacked the extra $17 billion that the Morrison government has just said it's going to spend on aged care. He said that was still not enough. It's still
$17.7 billion on an aged care package that doesn't even clear the waiting lists or fix the issues that this Prime Minister's cuts created.
And do not forget, this same Jim Chalmers has already demanded that the government's $90 billion JobKeeper wage subsidy scheme, he wanted that to be kept going after March when it ended. All those billions he wanted spent extra, all on the credit card. When, in fact, you look around, there's actually more people now in work than before the crisis.
There's no substitute for a responsible, temporary and targeted extension of JobKeeper. When the government cuts JobKeeper at the end of this month, it will cut jobs. It's as simple as that.
So, if you think Labor would be more economically responsible than the Liberals, absolutely not. And this is so important because the Treasury Secretary, Stephen Kennedy, yesterday warned that, yes, spending big now, that's okay because of the virus crisis, got to get over that. But he said, we're soon going to have to slash spending by 8% to eventually balance the books. Cut spending? And by 8%? You try and take that sort of money off people. Tony Abbott tried that. He tried to cut just a small fraction of that 8%. He was destroyed, thrown out. You tell me, who out there is now the political leader who will cut spending by anything like 8%? Scott Morrison? Labor's Anthony Albanese? Albo would be even worse. Is there any doubt? And then there was Penny Wong today, also reminding us, watch out for Labor. She claimed the Prime Minister was just picking fights with China for cheap votes from Conservatives.
Too much of the discussion on China is frenzied, afraid and lacking context. And this has been made so much worse by a Prime Minister who is only interested to the extent it offers him political value.
Seriously? Attacking Morrison for treating China like the threat it is, a dictatorship openly threatening war. Is Labor really suggesting that we shouldn't now be making common cause with other democracies also alarmed by China to protect ourselves? Good on Morrison for doing this. Or should we just kowtow instead? Button our lips, fear of the great dictatorship. To repeat, whatever the government is doing, do not rule out Labor being worse. Global warming, another one. I mean, yes, I'm frustrated that this government is not challenging the great global warming scare with the science. It's even hinting that it's going to go to the big climate conference in Glasgow this year, promising zero net emissions for 2050. And when it does, you'll hear me complain. But once again, if you think that's bad, Labor would be far worse. More emissions cuts, more damage, more expensive electricity, all to make zero difference to a climate crisis that doesn't exist. So we have here an unusual and a worrying situation. We have a government that's basically a Labor light one, and a Labor opposition that thinks it should therefore be even more left-wing, more irresponsible. And don't forget, I haven't even mentioned its race politics. I mean, that's a separate Aboriginal-only advisory parliament? Talk of a treaty that formally divides us by race? Are they nuts? Now, Anthony Albanese is being a small target so far. So I just wonder what else he's got in the backpack, quietly awaiting the calling of an election before he tells us what he's got in mind. Is it perhaps something like the authoritarian Labor government policies in Victoria, except applied everywhere? This country deserves better than what it's getting, and Labor should be forcing this government to be better, not threatening to be much worse.